As trust in governments around the world continues to decline, many of them are attempting to maintain control by clamping down on misinformation and disinformation, also known as truths they don't like. A recent hearing by the Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government revealed just how far some governments are about to go to clamp down on dissent, and it is frankly scary. That's why today we're going to summarize what was said and tell you what you can do to fight back against the incoming online censorship. This is a video you don't want to miss. Let's start with a quick bit of background. What you heard in the introduction is correct. There is a political committee on Capitol Hill that's dedicated to analysing the weaponization of the government. It was established in January last year, and it's safe to say that it's been controversial. That's mainly because most of the subcommittee's hearings have focused on criticising the current administration's use of government powers. This has resulted in mostly partisan talking points, which honestly aren't worth covering. The actual contents of these hearings, however, certainly are. Case in point, the hearing we'll be summarising today is about, quote, the federal government's role in funding the development of AI-powered censorship and propaganda tools that can be used by governments and big tech to monitor and censor speech at scale. Now, to our understanding, this hearing was organised because of a bombshell report published by the Daily Caller last February, which found that the National Science Foundation, or NSF, an independent US government agency, had invested $40 million into developing tools for online censorship. Caitlin Richardson, the journalist who wrote the report, believes that the US government is in the process of putting together a so-called censorship industrial complex by funding this and other AI research. FYI, other governments around the world are basically in the process of doing the same. More about all the online censorship laws being passed around the world in the description. Moving on. Now, as you might have guessed, Caitlin was one of the 4 people who testified. The other 3 were Greg Lukianoff, the president and CEO of the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, or FIRE, Li Fang, an investigative journalist who worked on the infamous Twitter files, which revealed how big tech was coordinating with governments to censor dissent, and Norman Eisen, a former US ambassador. It's important to reiterate that while the motivations for this hearing were likely partisan, the facts that were revealed are something you need to know regardless of your political leanings or location. We are fundamentally dealing with powerful tools that could be used by any administration or government. So, while you may cheer the use of these tools against people you dislike today, know that they could someday be used against you too. And if you think that's fine because you consider yourself non-partisan, think again. History suggests that the use of these powerful tools tends to go to the extreme. And some would say we're already living in this kind of world. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, be sure to smash that like button in order to give it a boost, and consider subscribing to the channel if you want to see more content exposing our collective power structures. Yes, the year 1964 has begun, and to commemorate the new year, we asked some young people how they think the future will look in 60 years' time. What will the world be like in the year 2024?
There'll be so many people that they'll have to have an overflow into the sea.
I think whenever we have a question, we'll just ask a computer and it will tell us the answer.
Everyone will have their own flying car and they'll just be flying around all over the place.
Or I may be at the funeral of a computer.
I don't think there'll be politicians or anything like that. I think there'll be monkeys and they'll be in charge.
Yes, I think the Coin Bureau deals page will be the place where all the best deals in crypto can be found. No doubt about it. It'll be absolutely fantastic.
Because there'll be more cures for the diseases, and not so many people will get sick.
Anyone who's got any sense will store their money on their own hardware device where no one will be able to get it. And they'll use the Coin Bureau deals page to get the best discounts on those devices.
All dogs and cats will probably be robots by then, and you won't have to take them to the vet or anything, really.
I think when you sign up to an exchange on the Coin Bureau Deals page, you'll get discounts on trading fees of up to 60%. It'll be lovely.
I expect they will set aside parts of the country solely for recreation.
One day, the Coin Bureau Deals page will offer up to $50,000 in sign-up bonuses on some of the best cryptocurrency exchanges. I can't wait. I really can't. It'll be splendid. So, there you have it. The year 2024 is going to be quite incredible by all accounts. The future's bright. The future's Coin Bureau.
There's nothing you can do to stop it.
Now, the hearing began as all hearings do, and that was with opening statements from politicians on both sides of the aisle. The first to speak was Jim Jordan. He started by listing all the times that the US government had coordinated with big tech to censor otherwise legal speech. It was a long old list. He then cited a recent bombshell report which found that the US government had even been pressuring Amazon to effectively ban certain books on its platform during the pandemic. Jim warned that these censorship efforts are starting to evolve with generative AI, which has truly taken the world by storm. He then provided a few quotes from the censorship studies that had been funded by the US government. These included quotes about how these tools could be used to avoid legal accountability, since it would be an automated program doing the censorship, not a legally accountable person. The most damning quote, however, was about how some of these studies are specifically looking to target minorities and those who live in rural areas with their online censorship tools. This is because both groups tend to believe in something higher than the government's authority, which is a problem. And that's not all. Jim then revealed that some of these tools are working on proactive censorship. In other words, what you say online will already be censored before you can even finish typing it. These are the kinds of ideas that have been actively discussed at the World Economic Forum's annual conferences, by the way. And you can find our summary of the most recent WEF conference using the link in the description. Moving on. Now, the second politician to speak was Stacey Plaskett. She dismissed everything Jim said as a conspiracy theory. She said that she was frustrated that they were discussing this topic for the 6th time, and said that the real weaponization of the government happened during the previous administration. So, with all the partisan talking points supposedly out of the way, the witnesses gave their own opening testimonies. Caitlin was the first to speak. After arguing that the US government is creating a censorship industrial complex, she revealed that many of the censorship studies she discovered last year are still ongoing. If you're wondering why Caitlin believes a censorship industrial complex is being made, she explained that it's because it's becoming a sort of emerging industry that's being heavily funded by governments. And this reminded us of the growing crypto compliance industry, whose purpose is to appease the Financial Action Task Force. To her credit, Caitlin said that she's confronted these institutions about their research. They proceeded to launch a marketing campaign claiming that the censorship research was being done in the name of protecting democracy. And that seems to be a popular excuse for government overreach these days. Anyways, the second witness to speak was Lee. He explained that AI can allow for censorship at an unprecedented scale. He went on to recount his findings when he worked on the Twitter files, notably the collaboration between Big Pharma and the organizations which help big tech censor information online. What's crazy is that Lee revealed that these initiatives had been set aside after the pandemic ended, but have come back as of last summer. Make of that what you will. Lee then explained that many of the tools that were originally designed by governments to fight terrorists are now being used against their own citizens. He warned that these tools will be wielded by whoever is in power against their political opponents, and begged for the committee to be non-partisan. Now, the third witness to speak was Greg. He explained that FIRE actively fights the infringement of free speech by the government across the country, and that it has done this for both the right wing and left wing. He said that the fights they've had so far will pale in comparison to what could come with AI. And he touched on the problem of so-called AI alignment, which we explained in our video about ChatGPT. Now, in theory, alignment is supposed to be about teaching AI to do what you want it to do. In practice, however, it often involves teaching AI to act in accordance with whatever the government wants it to do. However, Greg stressed that AI is just another tool, and that means that it can be used to expand freedom of speech, just like the internet did. He said that the internet and AI are analogous to the printing press, which famously brought about the end of religious control over governments. But of course, Greg stressed that this is only true if AI is allowed to evolve in a free and decentralized way. Too much regulation will result in unwanted consequences, such as censorship, and also risks setting back the United States' competitiveness on the technology front. Can't forget about that one. And finally, it was Norman's turn to speak, and as is often the case with these hearings, he was partisan to the point that he was practically pounding the table. Notably, he said that everyone next to him was crying wolf and argued that it's okay for the government to be working with big tech and AI companies on stuff. He then went one step further by arguing that the government is also, quote, allowed to make its concerns known to big tech and is allowed to fund any kind of AI stuff it pleases. He then announced that he's currently offering a scholarship to those wanting to explore AI and democracy. Now, with the opening statements out of the way, the question period began. The first to ask questions was Thomas Massey. He asked Lee about the US government's AI censorship programs. Lee revealed something insane, that he's discovered a program which involves the creation of AI bots on social media that will argue with people the government says are spreading misinformation and disinformation. So, if you said something on social media that your government doesn't like and got spammed with a bunch of replies from strange-looking accounts, well, chances are it was government-funded AI bots. The next politicians to ask questions were Jerry Connolly, Matt Gaetz, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I won't repeat what they said here because it was all pointlessly partisan, but note that there is a link to the full hearing in the description so you can check it out in your own time. It is well worth a watch. Now, the fifth to ask questions was Kelly Armstrong. He listed all the grants that the US government had given for censorship research and then asked Caitlin about one of them, which was to prepare students to work in disinformation-related jobs. This is the censorship industrial complex she was talking about. Caitlin confirmed that this was a summer internship program for students that had been given a grant by the US government. Kelly asked her about what these students were being taught to identify as misinformation. Caitlin said it was lots of things, but the main focus was information around elections. Now this is terrifying, considering that over 4.2 billion people around the world will be voting in elections this year. It seems that governments are intent on ensuring that status quo candidates are elected. All we're wondering is why they haven't implemented transparent blockchain voting yet. Well, you can probably guess why. Anywho, after a few partisan questions from anti-crypto politician Stephen Lynch, Jim asked Lee about something he mentioned in his opening statement, and that's that there had been a hearing about the US government funding censorship programs way back in 2012. Jim confirmed that yes, that was the case, and back then it was the other side of the aisle that was pushing for online censorship, and today the tables have turned. Greg underscored the fact that the tables could turn again, highlighting the fact that you should not applaud these tools even if they're being used against people you don't like, because someday they could be used against you. Now, the eighth politician to ask questions was John Garamendi. Like most of the other politicians, his line of questioning was super partisan, but he revealed something that's worth repeating. There is a coordinated plan by conservative interest groups called Plan 2025 to reshape the US government. The reason why this is worth repeating is because some of you may have gotten the sense that the opposition we've seen rising around the world seems to be controlled. Put simply, all these individuals and institutions which claim to be fighting against the status quo are part of the same power structure. For example, many people have noticed that the opposition leaders we've seen elected in many countries are also part of the World Economic Forum, or WEF. Now, if you watched our video about the WEF's plans, you'll know they literally have programs in place to help their preferred candidates get elected around the world. Now, to be clear, we don't believe that Plan 2025 is in any way affiliated with the WEF. That's just because it's apparently being led by the Heritage Foundation, whose president went viral for speaking out against the WEF at Davos. Anyhow, after more partisan questions from Daryl Issa and Stacey Plaskett, Greg Stuber asked Lee about NewsGuard, an agency that rates the truthfulness of news websites. Lee said that he had done lots of work on NewsGuard and said that the company is part of a growing disinformation industry. What's not surprising is that Lee found that NewsGuard has received military contracts and has been influencing how mainstream media reports on foreign policy-related issues. This is not surprising because the CIA once had a program called Operation Mockingbird, which involved manipulating US media during the Cold War for propaganda purposes. Operation Mockingbird officially ended in the 1970s, but many have argued that it continues to this day. Now, after even more partisan questions from Sylvia Garcia, Dan Bishop, and Dan Goldman, Jim interrupted everyone to remind them that the second Dan had admitted that the US government had been requesting big tech to take down certain content, but that big tech only complied 35% of the time. Yikes. Kat Kamak was the next to speak, and she drove Jim's point home. The point of this hearing wasn't to be partisan. It was to address the digital authoritarianism that's emerging from the US government. She said this is an issue that the average person is facing, and if you think you're not, well, you're in for a surprise. But alas, this didn't stop the partisanship. There were more pointless questions from Stacey Plaskett and even a few from Harriet Hageman. Finally, pro-crypto politician Warren Davidson spoke, and he touched on something that nobody else seemed to want to talk about. The US government is making a digital ID. More about that in the description. But anyway, back to the topic at hand. Warren went on to ask Greg to give some statistics which prove that censorship is on the rise. Greg gave a shocking one, and that's that 2020 and 2021 saw the firing of the largest number of college professors in the United States since the 1930s. Greg emphasized that these professors fell on both ends of the political spectrum. He went on to argue that the apparent purge of academics who refused to go along with the status quo during the pandemic has set the stage for truly dystopian AI, because the ones who are left are the ones who are developing the AI censorship tech with government grants, and they all fell in line. After a few more partisan comments by Jim, Russell Fry made an eye-opening one. He said that in order to get a grant to do censorship research from the government, you must apply for it. What this means is that the people who are getting these grants are in fact looking to exercise their censorship powers at the outset. Russell asked Greg how this can be stopped, and Greg had an even more eye-opening answer. Regulation is not the solution because it would result in more centralization and runs the risk of future controls. The only solution is decentralization, to decentralize AI so that no single entity can have these controls. We could not agree more. This brings us to the big question, and that is how you can fight back against all the online censorship we're seeing and are likely to see. Well, the first answer is one that many people forget, and that's to find a way to tell the truth that's calm, collected, and ideally backed by some sort of argument and some statistics. More often than not, people tell the truth with lots of hyperbole, offensive language, and other things that will get you censored regardless of what you're trying to say. Now, some would argue that you should be able to say this however you want. In the US, this is largely true. In the rest of the world, not so much. The second answer is to pick your battles wisely. There is no point in screaming about something into the void, as many people do on Twitter, and there's also no point in arguing with government-backed AI bots, as many people on Twitter also do. If nobody's mind will be changed, well, don't bother trying. Instead, make your concerns known to someone who's willing to listen, or even willing to care. If you're lucky, you'll find a politician who fits this profile, but don't get your hopes up. It's best that you focus on telling the truth to people you know. If you do it in a way that's understandable, it may just spread. And this ties into the third answer, and that's to understand that the kind of AI-driven censorship many governments appear to be pursuing is only possible on certain social media platforms. If you're getting involved with like-minded people in real life or online, you probably won't be affected much by it. That said, it goes without saying that you must be careful about ending up in an echo chamber. You also need to be aware that ignoring what's going on with censorship won't solve it, and it will eventually affect you if you let it get to that point. Unfortunately, it might not always be possible to fight back. Fortunately, though, you don't always need to. And this relates to the fourth answer, and that's to use alternative platforms that aren't capable of succumbing to the online censorship that's being imposed. There are still centralized platforms that are committed to free speech, but they are being hunted by regulators. It's likely that they will eventually be forced to comply, which leaves decentralized platforms as the only alternative. Now, if you watched our video about the narratives of the next crypto bull market, you'll know this is why we're bullish on decentralized social media. People may have to adopt it out of necessity. And this pertains to the final answer, which is to vote for people who are committed to protecting free speech. Now, it might sound silly, but free speech is more important than anything else, and that's probably why it's in the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. Without free speech, it becomes difficult to know the truth. And when you don't know the truth, it becomes difficult to live in accordance with reality, which is based on the truth. And when it becomes difficult to live in accordance with reality, society starts to fall apart. And when society starts to fall apart, well, everyone loses, eventually even the people in power. In sum then, fighting back against censorship means telling the truth in a way that people will actually listen and understand it, finding alternatives when this no longer becomes possible online, and voting for people who will protect free speech so it doesn't get to that point in the first place. For many of you watching, 2024 is the year to exercise your democratic right before it's too late. And that's all for today's video. So if you learned something new, smash that like button to let us know. If you want to keep learning, subscribe to the channel and ping that notification bell. And if you want to help others learn about this important issue, be sure to share this video with them. And with that, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Guy, signing off.